You spend good money on your third wave coffee, so why not get the best flavor out of your coffee? There are two things that we're going to discuss today when it comes to optimizing the flavor of your coffee, which is how long do you wait after roast to brew? Other things that you might have heard is letting coffee rest or degassing coffee. And the other thing we're going to discuss is how do you retain the best flavors in the short and long term in order to keep and preserve those peak delicious flavors in your coffee. Why degas when you're roasting this little coffee bean right here? Gases, mostly carbon dioxide as a byproduct of roasting, basically burning stuff, get trapped inside the coffee bean. There is such a thing as too fresh when it comes to coffee because the coffee is still degassing. The carbon dioxide, the CO2 is escaping the coffee bean, and CO2 can actually interfere with the brewing process because it repels water and will get in the way as you're trying to get the water to extract solubles out of the coffee bean. Also, CO2 can impact the flavor of coffee when there's too much in your brew and can make the coffee a little bit sour. So it can make it more difficult to extract and affect the flavor as well. I'm talking about coffee beans that are not ground. Pre-ground degasses really quickly and then you're gonna lose a lot of flavor too. Once there's been sufficient CO2 that has escaped your coffee bean, that time frame depends on your brewing process, which we will cover, then water can freely extract the aromatics and the oils and the solubles and all that out of your coffee. That's why you often see these CO2 valves on coffee bags. The roaster will typically bag coffee as soon as they're done roasting, but there's a lot of CO2 that's still escaping, so this CO2 valve allows those gases to escape, otherwise this bag could explode. But no oxygen can get inside, so there's no oxidation going on so long as the bag is sealed. That is if you're getting it from a third wave coffee and there's a roast date. If you're trying to get the freshest coffee and the best quality coffee, it's not necessarily going to be a grocery store unless they carry third wave as well. But do look out for a roast date, not an expiration date. Two very different things. This is what you need to understand for the wait time. The longer the contact time with the water with your coffee in the brewing process, the shorter the resting time. Think about it this way. French press, you leave the coffee in there for a long time. Immersion, brewing, you don't need to let the coffee rest as much. But then when it comes to espresso, it's a very short contact time because you're throwing that water through that coffee puck and the brew process is not as long. It's maybe, 30 seconds. Also something to note, darker roasts typically degas faster than lighter roasts because you're basically breaking down the coffee a little bit more as you're roasting it, as you're cooking it. It's also more porous, like everything's just expelling out of the coffee bean a bit quicker. Naturally processed coffee takes a little bit longer to degas than washed coffee. Editing Jess here. Two things to remember when it comes to this. Naturally processed coffees versus washed coffees will take longer to degas, and light roast coffees compared to dark roast coffees will also take longer to degas. Why is that? It has to do more with the fact that washed coffees are denser and so they get a different type of heat application versus a naturally processed coffee. That affects probably the porosity and how it traps the gases in the coffee and then how also it is able to escape easily or not. How long do you wait to brew off roast? For espresso, typically online, if you look, you'll see 7 to 14 days. I tend to wait 14 days to 21 days, so 2 to 3 weeks off roast. And this is after speaking with two different roasters that told me that their coffees they found best consumed 3 weeks past roast. And even one of these roasters, when they changed their machine, they went from 2 weeks to 3 weeks. So you're gonna have to experiment a little bit with this, but you have a general time frame. I would say start around the 2 week mark. I personally don't really notice a huge difference, but I just tend to stick to the 2 to 3 week mark. Definitely don't consume within the first week because there's too much gas coming out of the bean and it's gonna cause an issue with your brew. My time frame goes as such. Generally for light roast, which is pretty much what I consume 90% of the time, I will wait 2 to 3 weeks off roast. For darker roasts, like around at the 2 week mark is when I personally will brew. General rule for pour over and AeroPress, a range of 4 to 7 days. Pour over is a much more gentle extraction. You also do a blooming process at the beginning. And when you bloom the coffee, you let the gases escape when it's interacting with the water. You wait a little bit, then you continue your extraction. With pour over methods, The brewing process is typically a couple minutes, somewhere around 3 to 3.5 minutes. Because of that longer contact time with water and a gentler extraction, the water passing through the coffee at a slower rate, the longer brewing time allows for the CO2 gases to escape more. And now an AeroPress typically is also within that same time frame. Similarly with French press, it is all contained its full immersion brewing, as in the coffee beans and the water are just full contact time in there the entire time before you stop the extraction and pour out your coffee. Now with that, you don't have to wait as long because the contact time with water is the longest out of all these brew methods I just mentioned. And because of that, the gases are escaping, but it's not interrupting the brew process. And so you only have to wait even up to 2 days off roast. You can consume your coffee. All of this is not hard, set, fast rules. Please share in the comments down below what you drink and how long you wait off roast. This can help other people get an idea of where to start, and then experiment, play around, take some notes. And if you're not that picky and you find a time frame that works for you, stick with it. Now, the second thing we will discuss is preserving the coffee at its peak maximum best flavor, depending on your brew process. So all of those time frames that we discussed. And once you open that bag and it's past that time frame, it starts to degrade pretty quickly. I find typically naturals and anaerobics, especially anaerobic naturals, will really lose their flavor fast. And I've made that mistake where I didn't follow my own storage general rules. The coffee just didn't taste that great after. It didn't taste terrible, but it really lost its flavor, its uniqueness, especially with anaerobic naturals that have that really strong punch of funkiness added to them because they just degraded really quickly. So keep in mind that this is my system. I'm sure you have other systems that you could follow that other people have online. If you have your own system, chime in the comments section. So feel free to use this as a guide and then adapt it. Please like and subscribe. This video does help with the algorithm. Once that coffee is at peak freshness, there's two things that I do. There's the consume now, and then there is the consume later category. And typically, you're not gonna be able to consume an entire bag of coffee within the week. And or you like to consume multiple different kinds of coffee at the same time, you are going to wanna store it for the long term and keep that peak freshness. For my consume now category, I split up the coffee right away into this single dose with a CO2 valve bean cellar. I'm gonna link this in the description. It is much cheaper than the Weber workshops. I think it works well enough. The coffee was off roast about 2 to 3 weeks. I put it in here, I didn't consume all of it, went on a trip. 3 weeks later, came back, opened it, still smelled really fresh, still tasted really great, still brewed really great. The CO2 valve does work. I did a really simple experiment where I blew on the cap and the air went out, but then I tried to blow in the cap in the other direction and no air went in. By that assumption, I'm assuming CO2 can escape, but oxygen's not going in. Or just air can escape and air can't get in. So for the consume now category, I split all my coffees right away and I have 2, 4, 6, 12 days worth of coffee here, almost 2 weeks worth of coffee. Right now I actually have two different coffees. I have a darker roast in the back and then a lighter roast in the front. See, light roast, dark roast. I like doing that because then I have two different coffees on rotation, two completely different flavor profiles. And then the great thing is that, yeah, I do have to spend a little bit of time splitting them up at the very beginning, but then in the mornings, it's the fastest process. I just pick which coffee I do and dump it in my grinder. You sometimes do have to wiggle the coffee out of the container with this one because unlike the Weber workshops, this has a threaded cap and so the opening is a little bit more narrow. A small trade-off for a big price difference. Then for the rest of the coffees that don't fit in here, I freeze them right away. So this is in my consume later category. And how you freeze them is important. I currently use these Foodsaver bags, which are these reusable vacuum sealed bags. It keeps everything really fresh. I use this for other things as well. See, just pull out all the air because I had opened this earlier. And you have this nice vacuum sealed bag of coffee. I label it, I write the grind size, and then I throw it in my freezer. And I have a couple of these bags in my freezer, which is really great because sometimes I will run out of coffee and thankfully I have an extra little stock somewhere in my freezer. When I'm ready to consume again, I will put this in the fridge, thaw it for 1 day. The next day, take out the amount of coffee that I need, whether it's for just 1 day or redistribute entirely in here. And then I re-vacuum seal the entire bag and throw it back in the freezer if I haven't finished all of them, and then so on and so forth until I am done. I typically don't have coffees in there for an entire year. From what I've seen online, if it's well vacuum sealed and fresh, you can have the coffees in the freezer for up to 3 years. Another thing I will do is, now that I have my coffee shelf, which I have a whole full video on that if you're curious about it, I have bags of coffee that I'll have sitting on there that are degassing, and I let them sit until they're ready. Sometimes if I have too much coffee going on at once, what I'll do is, once it's ready to be frozen, I will empty it out, put it in a vacuum sealed bag, and throw it in my freezer, or cover the valve, throw it in my freezer with the full bag. But if I do that with the full bag as is, I don't leave it there for more than a month. I think you could leave it in your freezer, full bag and all, for 3 to 6 months. I'm just doing that for about up to a month because I'm going to take it out, thaw it, and then use it right away. Whatever I don't use, I will put in a vacuum sealed pack and then throw it back in the freezer. If you're curious to know more about my coffee bars, particularly this coffee shelf, and even how I use it as a system to keep stock of what I have in terms of my coffee inventory and degassing it, you can check that video right here. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.